The desperate deal. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair. 2 scents Mira Chen had grown far too familiar with over the past 6 months. She sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside the oncology ward, her fingers stained with charcoal from the art class she'd rushed away from. Her phone displayed a number that made her stomach clench: $47,000. That was what they still needed for her mother's experimental treatment. And her teacher's salary barely covered the existing medical bills. "Miss Chen?" A nurse approached with sympathetic eyes. "Your mother is asking for you." Mira stood, smoothing down her paint-splattered jeans, and entered room 304. Her mother, once vibrant and full of life, looked small against the white sheets. But her smile remained warm as ever. "Stop worrying so much, my darling," her mother whispered, reaching for Mira's hand. "We'll figure something out." But they both knew the truth. Without the treatment, the doctors gave her mother 6 months, maybe less. That evening, as Mira walked through the rain toward her tiny apartment, her phone rang from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep, controlled, and unsettlingly direct. "Miss Chen, my name is Sebastian Vale. I have a proposal that could solve your financial difficulties." Mira stopped under a flickering streetlight. "I'm sorry, who?" "Sebastian Vale, CEO of Vale Technologies. I need a wife and you need money. I'm prepared to offer you $5 million. The world seemed to tilt. Mira had heard of Sebastian Vale, everyone had. The tech billionaire was famous for his ruthless business strategies and cold demeanor. At 32, he'd built an empire that most people couldn't achieve in 3 lifetimes. "This is a joke," Mira said, her voice shaking. "I assure you it's not. Meet me tomorrow at Celestial Tower, 10th floor, 2 p.m. if you're interested." The line went dead. Mira stood in the rain, water streaming down her face, mixing with tears she didn't remember starting to cry. It was insane, absolutely insane. But as she thought of her mother's frail body and diminishing time, she knew she would go to that meeting. The next day, Mira entered the sleek glass building that housed Vale Technologies. Everything screamed wealth and power, from the marble floors to the designer furniture. She felt painfully out of place in her simple cotton dress and worn flats. Sebastian's office was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. When she entered, he stood with his back to her, a tall figure in an impeccable charcoal suit. When he turned, Mira's breath caught. He was handsome in a sharp, almost severe way, dark hair, intense gray eyes, and a jawline that could cut glass. But there was something else. Something in the way he looked at her that made her skin prickle with an inexplicable familiarity. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice revealing nothing. "Thank you for coming." "Why me?" Mira asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Why would someone like you need to buy a wife?" Sebastian's expression remained neutral. "My board requires me to present a more stable, family-oriented image. You need money urgently. It's a simple transaction. For how long? 1 year. After that, we divorce quietly. You keep the money." Mira's hands trembled. "And what would you expect from me?" "Public appearances. Living in my home. Maintaining the illusion of a happy marriage." He paused, something flickering in his eyes before vanishing. "Nothing more." She should have walked away. Should have found another way. But as her phone buzzed with another hospital bill notification, Mira heard herself say, "I'll do it." Something shifted in Sebastian's expression, too quick to read. "Then we have a deal." Shadows of the past. The wedding happened within 2 weeks, a small civil ceremony with no guests except the required witnesses. Mira wore a simple cream dress from a department store, while Sebastian appeared in another perfect suit. As they exchanged vows, his hand trembled slightly when he slipped the platinum ring onto her finger, the only crack in his composed facade. Her mother's treatment began immediately. The best doctors, the best facility, the best care money could buy. Mira visited her every day, watching color return to her mother's cheeks while guilt gnawed at her conscience. She'd sold herself for her mother's life, and somehow that felt both noble and shameful. Sebastian's penthouse was a study in minimalist luxury. Cold, clean lines and expensive art that felt more like investments than passions. He'd given her an entire wing to herself and maintained a polite distance. They shared occasional dinners in silence, attended 2 charity galas where he played the attentive husband perfectly, and otherwise existed as strangers sharing an address. But Mira noticed things. The way Sebastian's eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. How he stocked the kitchen with jasmine tea, her favorite, though she'd never told him. The classical piano music that drifted through the penthouse at night. Always melancholy pieces that spoke of longing. One evening, searching for a book in his study, Mira discovered a drawer she hadn't meant to open. Inside lay a weathered sketchbook, its pages yellowed with age. Her heart stopped as she flipped through it. They were her drawings, pieces she'd created years ago during her volunteer work at the Riverside Community Center when she was 16. There were charcoal sketches of hands, watercolor landscapes, and pencil portraits of people she'd long forgotten. But tucked in the back was a drawing she didn't remember making, a teenage boy with hopeful eyes and a shy smile. At the bottom, in her younger handwriting, for Bastian, who deserves to dream big. Bastian. The name hit her like a wave. A poor scholarship student who used to sit in the corner of the art room, always alone, always watching her with those intense eyes. He'd been so quiet she barely remembered him, just another face in the crowd of kids she'd tried to help. You weren't supposed to find those. Mira spun around. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his usual composure cracking. In the dim light, she finally saw it. The same bone structure, the same eyes, just hardened by time and success. Bastian, she whispered. How is this possible? Bastian stepped into the room, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked vulnerable. You don't remember me at all, do you? Not really. Mira's mind raced through fragmented memories. You were so quiet. You barely spoke to anyone. I spoke to you, he said softly. Every Wednesday for 6 months you taught me to draw. You bought me art supplies with your babysitting money when you learned I couldn't afford them. You told me I could be anything I wanted, that poverty didn't define potential. His voice cracked. You saved my life, Mira, and I fell in love with you. The room spun. Why didn't you say something? Why this elaborate charade? Because you saw me as a charity case then, and I couldn't bear for you to see me that way again. He ran a hand through his hair, his carefully maintained control shattering. I built everything, the company, the wealth, the reputation, partly hoping that one day I'd be someone you could see. Really see? Mira's hands shook, the sketchbook falling to the floor. So you bought me? No, Sebastian said desperately. I helped you. I gave you what you needed to save your mother. I never wanted you to feel... He stopped, his eyes glistening. This was my only chance, my only way back to you. The breaking point, the wedding night had arrived, though it felt more like a reckoning than a beginning. Mira sat on the edge of the guest room bed, still wearing her simple wedding dress, her mind reeling from Sebastian's confession. Through the walls, she could hear him pacing in the master bedroom, back and forth like a caged animal. She couldn't reconcile the cold billionaire with the broken boy from her memories. That Bastian had been invisible, a ghost in the background of her teenage altruism. She'd helped dozens of kids at that community center. How was she supposed to remember one quiet boy among so many? But he'd remembered her. For 16 years. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mira? Sebastian's voice was rough, stripped of its usual authority. May I come in? She opened the door. He'd loosened his tie and his eyes were red-rimmed. In his hands he held a worn shoebox. I need to show you something, he said. Then you can decide if you want to stay or leave. I'll give you the money either way. I won't trap you. They sat on the floor, the box between them. Sebastian opened it with trembling hands, revealing a collection of memories that took Mira's breath away. Concert tickets from events she'd mentioned loving, newspaper clippings about her art exhibitions, a dried jasmine flower, the kind that grew outside that old community center, and letters, dozens of unsent letters. After my mother died when I was 17, Sebastian began, his voice barely above a whisper, I had nothing. I was sleeping in shelters, working 3 jobs trying to finish school. I wanted to die, Mira. Every single day I wanted to give up. He picked up one of the letters, his hands shaking. But I remembered what you told me, that I deserved to dream big, so I did. I got scholarships, built my first app, sold it for enough to start Veil Technologies. Mira unfolded one of the letters, dated 8 years ago. Dear Mira, today, Veil Tech went public. I'm worth $50 million on paper, but I still feel like that poor kid who couldn't afford pencils. I looked you up. You're teaching art at Roosevelt High. You look happy in your faculty photo. I almost called, but what would I say? Remember that charity case you helped? I'm rich now. Notice me. I sound pathetic even to myself. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for another letter, then another. Each one chronicled his success, his loneliness, his persistent, aching love for a girl who'd shown him one semester of kindness. When I learned about your mother's illness, Sebastian continued, I saw my chance. I know it was selfish. I know it was manipulative. But I couldn't let you suffer when I had the power to help. He finally met her eyes, tears streaming down his face. I never wanted to buy you, Mira. I just wanted one chance for you to see me. The real me. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just Bastian, who never stopped loving you. The confession broke something open in Mira's chest. She thought of all the times she'd congratulated herself for helping underprivileged kids, never considering the depth of impact she might have had. Never imagining that her small kindnesses could reshape someone's entire existence. I was a stupid 16-year-old girl who thought she was changing the world, Mira said, her own tears falling. I didn't even see you, Bastian. Not really. I saw a project. A kid to help, but I never saw you. You saw enough, he whispered. You saw more than anyone else ever did. Unraveling hearts, the next morning, Mira woke to find Sebastian gone. A note on the kitchen counter read, Take all the time you need. The guest room is yours as long as you want it. But instead of relief, she felt an unexpected ache. She'd spent the night reading every letter in that shoebox, watching a boy transform into a man through words he'd never had the courage to send. Each letter revealed pieces of Sebastian she'd never seen. His dry humor, his insecurity, his surprising tenderness. He wrote about classical music because it reminded him of the Mozart piece she'd hummed while painting. He'd learned to cook because she'd once mentioned loving homemade pasta. Every detail of his carefully constructed life was a love letter she'd never known she was receiving. Her mother's call interrupted her thoughts. Darling, when am I meeting your husband properly? You've been married 3 weeks and I've only seen him at the hospital once. Guilt twisted in Mira's stomach. She'd been so caught up in her own confusion that she hadn't considered how her mother might feel about the situation. Soon, Mom, I promise. Mira, her mother said gently. I may be sick, but I'm not blind. Something's wrong. Talk to me, so Mira did. She told her mother everything. The contract, the money, the truth about Sebastian's identity. Her mother listened in silence until Mira finished, her voice breaking on the last words. Do you know what I remember about you at 16? Her mother finally said. You came home every Wednesday glowing. You'd talk about this boy who was learning to draw, how talented he was, how he had the saddest eyes but the most beautiful smile when he finally relaxed. You mentioned him more than all the other kids combined, sweetheart. Mira's breath caught. I did? You cared about him even if you didn't realize how much, and he clearly never forgot. Her mother paused. The question is, what do you want now? Not what you think you should want, but what your heart wants. Mira didn't have an answer. That evening, she found Sebastian in his study, staring at a painting on the wall, one of hers from a gallery show last year. He'd bought it anonymously. She realized that now. I talked to my lawyer, he said without turning. The divorce papers are ready. You'll get everything I promised. Your mother's care is guaranteed for life, regardless of what you choose. Is that what you want? Mira asked. It doesn't matter what I want. Yes, it does. She moved closer. You've spent 16 years living for a memory of me, but I'm not that girl anymore, Sebastian. I'm messier, more cynical, more complicated. He finally turned, his gray eyes searching her face. I know, I've watched you grow from afar. I've seen you struggle and fight and create beautiful things from pain. I fell in love with that 16-year-old girl, but I'm in love with the woman you've become. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Mira thought about the life she'd planned. Simple, independent, safe. Then she thought about the man before her, who'd built an empire on the foundation of her kindness, who'd loved her so completely that it had shaped his entire existence. "I can't promise to love you back," Mira said carefully. "Not yet. I barely know you. I know, but I'd like to. Know you, I mean." She took a deep breath. "Can we start over? Properly this time? Date? Like normal people, even though we're already married?" For the first time since she'd known him, Sebastian smiled, really smiled, and she saw Bastian in that expression. The shy, hopeful boy who'd believed in dreams. "I'd like that very much," he whispered. A true beginning. 3 months later, Mira laughed as Sebastian, she still struggled to think of him as Bastian, tried and failed to recreate the pasta carbonara from their first official date. Their second attempt at first dates, technically. "Since the charity gala didn't count, I swear I've made this 100 times, he muttered, staring at the scorched pan. "You're nervous," Mira teased, sliding next to him at the stove. "Here, let me help." Their hands touched as she took the spatula, and the spark between them was undeniable now. They'd spent the past 3 months dating properly. Museum visits, movie nights, long conversations that stretched until dawn. She'd learned that Sebastian was funny when he relaxed, that he played piano when he couldn't sleep, that he volunteered anonymously at youth centers across the city, and slowly, carefully, she'd felt her heart opening. "Close your eyes," Sebastian said suddenly. "I have something to show you." He led her to his car, driving through the city as dusk painted the sky purple. They stopped in front of a renovated building in her old neighborhood. The sign above the door read, "The Mira Chen Center for Arts and Youth Development." Mira's hand flew to her mouth. "Sebastian, what?" "It's the old Riverside Community Center, fully renovated. Free art classes, music lessons, tutoring, everything those kids need." He took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I wanted to build something that honored what you gave me. What you gave all of us." Inside, the walls were covered with artwork. Teenage faces lit up around easels and instruments. At the front, a bronze plaque read, "In honor of those who see potential in others, especially when they cannot see it in themselves." Mira turned to Sebastian, tears streaming down her face. "This is the most incredible thing anyone's ever done." "You did it first," he said softly. "You just never knew how far the ripples would spread." They stood in the center lobby, watching kids create and laugh and dream, and Mira finally understood. Love wasn't always lightning strikes and instant recognition. Sometimes it was a quiet boy in the corner, building a life from the seeds of kindness. Sometimes it was second chances and slow burns and learning to see what had been there all along. "I love you," she whispered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Sebastian's eyes widened, his composure finally completely cracking. "You do?" "I do," Mira said, smiling at the echo of their wedding vows. "I love the boy who dreamed big and the man who never forgot where he came from. I love your terrible cooking and your midnight piano playing and the way you still get shy when I look at you too long." He kissed her then, in the center named for her kindness, surrounded by the future they were building together. It wasn't the love story either of them had planned. It was better. Messier, more complicated, more real. Her mother had fully recovered, the experimental treatment a success. She'd cried when they told her the truth about Sebastian's identity and his center, pulling them both into a fierce hug. "I always knew that boy was special," she'd whispered to Mira. "I just didn't realize you'd need 16 years to figure it out." As they left the center that night, hands intertwined, Sebastian pulled Mira close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance." "For seeing me?" He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that still made her heart skip. "For finally coming back to me." Mira reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "I think we found each other. Finally. Properly." And in the heart of the city where they'd first met as different people, Sebastian and Mira began their true story, not as billionaire and employee, not as stranger and forgotten memory, but as two people who'd learned that the most powerful currency wasn't money, it was love. patient and persistent, waiting 16 years for the perfect moment to bloom.